and Persons with Disabilities, Deputy Minister Steve Litsike, Advocate Mikateko Maluleke, the Director General of the Department, Prof. Shisana, the Advisor in the Presidency, Dr. Zungu from the HSRC, who has led us to this groundbreaking study, Prof. Zuma from the HSRC, all colleagues from the HSRC that are present, from the Department of Women that are present, colleagues from the Presidency that are present, all media houses that are present, and of course we note the presence of civil society that is here. Colleagues, our program today is very straightforward. We will first receive the presentation of the study, which will be led by Dr. Nompumelelo Zungu, the Principal Investigator, and Prof. Kangelani Zuma from the Divisional Executive of Human and Social Capabilities at the HSRC. We'll also receive messages of support from our donors and partners. We note the presence of the UN Women in South Africa, Dr. Hazel Gooding. We will then receive an acceptance of the first South African National Gender-Based Violence Study. So Minister Sindisiwe Chikunga will receive the study from the HSRC, and then we'll afford members of the media, firstly, and then any guests who are present who have any questions to ask our panel, which will include, of course, the Minister Chikunga, Deputy Minister Litsike, Advocate Maluleke, Dr. Zungu, Prof. Zuma, Prof. Olive Shisana, and Advocate Esther Maluleke. Sorry, I've now given you a new title, Ma'am Maluleke, and of course, sorry, Advocate Mikateko and Ms. Esther Maluleke from our department. Our Maluleke Baning, good department yet. So that's our program, colleagues, and then of course our Deputy Minister will close for us, weaving together the conversations we would have had today when we're receiving this very important study. We must acknowledge the great work that the HSRC has done. This country, Minister, showed its science and research capabilities during COVID-19. We are not a country that only has dark blue sky research, but we are a country that does research that has direct impact on the lived realities of citizens of this country. And this study is testament to that. As the former chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Higher Education, Science and Innovation, one would have been part of the build-up to the study. I think the HSRC brought the study to us twice. And so it's an honor for me now to be in the Department of Women, where we are the custodians of this report, and seeing myself come full circle and becoming part of a collective that will ensure that this study doesn't just lie on shelves in our departments and take up space in emails and mailboxes, but we really take the study to all parts of government and to South Africans at large to ensure that we are able to eradicate the scourge of gender-based violence and femicide. Colleagues, we are live on Government ZA's Facebook and YouTube channels. We are also encouraging you to tweet and share the findings and the recommendations that are being presented to us here today. You can use the hashtag HSRC GBV study. Please do share with the citizens who are not able to be with us here today what these findings and recommendations are. That being said, let me not waste any more time, but allow for Dr. Nompumelelo Zungu and Prof. Zuma to take us through the study, its findings, and its recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director, Honorable Minister, Honorable DM, colleagues. It's really a great pleasure for me to be presenting to you the first survey ever to be done in the country on the issues that are of great concern, the gender-based violence. Now, gender-based violence, as we all know, it's a widespread phenomenon in our country which disproportionately affects women and girls, and it's basically rooted in our systems of unequal power sharing and also power dynamics between women and men. There are a number of challenges that as a country we face, and one of them is that there is not a single study that is dedicated to look at the issues of gender-based violence at national level, like we do the population-based surveys. So for us to understand these issues, we need to understand, or we need a better understanding of how social structures, as well as social factors and structural factors, contribute to these high levels of pervasiveness of gender-based violence, inter-partner violence in South Africa, whereby inter-partner violence goes together or forms part of gender-based violence in the sense that it encompasses a number of issues, one of them being physical violence, sexual, emotional, as well as economic violence. And also, we're talking about abuse behavior, as well as harmful gender norms that exist in our society. So to deal with these issues of gender-based violence, as well as inter-partner violence, we need data that can inform multidisciplinary and holistic approaches that can promote gender equity and also the creation of a safer environment in our country, specifically for women and girls. Whilst as a country we have policies that are aimed at combating gender-based violence, however, implementation, funding, as well as addressing the cultural norms that are perpetuating violence, they remain a challenge in our society. With that, we, HSRC, together with our funder, whose aim and objectives was to describe the prevalence and patterns of experiences of physical, sexual, emotional, and economic gender-based violence among women in all provinces in our country, and also to describe the prevalence and patterns, perpetration of gender-based violence by men, specifically of physical, sexual, emotional, and economic gender-based violence in our country. And also to determine factors that are associated with gender-based violence victimization and perpetration, such as gender and sexual norms and attitudes, social behavioral risk factors, which will include alcohol and substance use, issues around mental health, and also violence among those that are victims of this scourge. Finally, the study aimed to determine the extent of experiences and perpetration of gender-based violence that is attributed to COVID-19 pandemic and also the lockdown period that we experienced during our exposure to COVID-19 period. How was this study designed? This, again, I would say, is the first ever study to be done at national level as a country. We've been relying on a small-scale studies, such as your police statistics, to understand the issues of gender-based violence. So for the first time, Human Sciences Research Council, together with its partners, conducted a nationally representative survey, which was aimed at targeting a total of just under 20,000 people to participate in this study. How the study was designed, this is a household-based survey whereby a number of geographical communities were randomly selected in the country. To be specific, just over 1,000 small area layers, these geographical communities were randomly sampled. Within these small area layers, a number of households, a random sample of 20 households were selected. Within these households, one person was randomly selected to participate in the study who was aged 18 years and above. And also for issues related to sensitivities of the study, the small area layers of these communities were separated. A total of 548 of them were identified for a sample of women to be interviewed, and another sample was identified for a sample of males who are potential participants to be interviewed, so that we do not interview or avoid or minimize a situation whereby in each household we interview both the perpetrator and also a person who's been exposed to gender-based violence. So this is a multi-stage stratified survey, and this is the methodology used is also a methodology recommended for such studies. Now, this study, just a second to remove things. This study collected data on a population at household level. We collected data at household, at population level, collecting information related to the circumstances within a household. As indicated, people who were aged 18 years and above were all eligible to participate in the study. Men were interviewed by men so that they could be free to talk about these issues, and also women were interviewed by women. Data was collected using electronic gadgets, the tablets, to collect information. We took a period of 2 weeks, an intensive training where our data collectors were trained to ensure that they become competent in collecting such sensitive information. Also, we followed rigorous international ethics and safety standards for conducting research around issues of violence against women. And also, we provided support for both participants as well as for staff who had to listen and pay attention to very sensitive issues that were raised by people who've been exposed to this act of gender-based violence. We used a questionnaire that was adapted from the World Health Organization, the Women's Health and Life Experiences Questionnaire version 12.06, which also had a part on the administration form that was completed, the household selection, where we selected a person to participate. The household questionnaire also was administered. The characteristics of respondents as well as the community, that's the information that was collected. General household status, information also collected. Attitude towards gender roles, characteristics of current and most recent partners, experiences of intimate partner violence. We collected detailed information about experiences, non-partner violence and COVID-19 exposures during violence that were directed towards males, specifically childhood experiences, awareness of perceptions of gender-based violence laws, as well as policies related to gender-based violence issues, and also a self-administered question on violence perpetration, so that males could actually feel free to complete that component of the questionnaire themselves. Now, the survey also had its own strengths and also its limitations. I would say one of the biggest strengths of this survey was that it was organized by researchers who are well experienced in organizing these population-based surveys, who have been involved in similar research in other topical issues such as HIV, conducting population-based household surveys using internationally recognized methodologies and also instruments. So the study was organized by a team of well-experienced and qualified researchers. The sample that was collected was also benchmarked to the population or the media statistics of the country for 2022, so that the sample that is collected could actually be comparable to the population distribution of our population in the country, so we can generalize our results to the population. And as indicated earlier on, we followed a very rigorous ethical and safety standard for research on violence against women. We included emotional, economic, as well as physical victimization and perpetration. We expanded the age range. Some of the studies get to limit the age range of people that participate in these studies. But in this study, we included everybody that is aged 18 years and above. So we even included people who are above 50 years who are ordinarily excluded in some of the studies. We were able to measure or using this data, we're able to measure poly-victimization, perpetration of different forms of violence. Also, the issues around non-response bias at unit level response. We had issues where people did not participate because this is a voluntary study. Some people refused to participate. However, because we could use statistical methods to correct for those potential response biases that could cause bias, so this has been corrected accordingly to minimize the effect of non-response. However, again, as researchers, we also declare whereby we could be, or the results could face some of the limitations. One of them, as indicated, the issues around response rate, which was minimal, especially at household level, but within individual households, once we get to the household, people were very happy to participate. So participation at an individual level improved a lot. And also we conducted this study at a time whereby we still had issues around COVID-19, and people were still apprehensive about having people in their households. So that also contributed to people not wanting to participate. And also, during that time, we were competing with other institutions. Statistics South Africa was actually organizing Census 2022 at the time. So, and also HSRC was involved in two large surveys, one of them the HIV prevalence survey, another one the food security study, and therefore some people were actually not keen on participating on so many studies. However, we did encourage people to participate. The social environment and general reluctance of the public to participate in personal data being collected was also an issue, and also acceptability of study and privacy issues related to gender identities and also being interviewed in the household. Some people were a bit apprehensive about that. Failure to find men and women who were eligible to participate in the specific households that were identified for a male respondent. Also, all data are self-reported and also subject to recall bias, especially for issues that happened a long time ago. The attempt to use respondent-driven sampling technique did not yield results that we intended, whereby we wanted to increase the number of people who have disabilities and a key population like your LGBTQI to participate in this study. It did not yield the results that we anticipate, so it was not successful to implement that part in the survey. Just getting to some results before I hand over to my colleague. As indicated, we targeted a sample of about 19,600 people to participate. And due to the reasons that I have already highlighted, a total of 10,000 people agreed to participate in this study. The sample size might be less than targeted. However, the sample estimation at the beginning, of course, there was no relevant or there was no perfect information about the prevalence of gender-based violence at the time, so the estimations were also not that close to what we wanted. However, the sample size of 10,000 people participating in this study is large enough. A number of tests have been done statistically to confirm that actually the data is robust, it is fit for purpose and can be used. Women were more likely to participate than males. A sample of 5,600 agreed to participate. A sample of 4,400 males agreed to participate. As you can see there, the response rate or participation rate among women was 97% compared to about 95% or 94.5% among males. So the response rate was quite good. As indicated, the sample was benchmarked to the population statistics of the mid-year 2022. Why mid-year 2022? Because the data, the largest part of the year where data was collected was in year 2022. So the generalizability of our data could be generalizable to mid-year, to the data that was collected in 2022, the population as it was in 2022. And it was benchmarked to the people who were 18 years and above, as indicated that 18-year-olds and above were included in the survey, benchmarked by age, race, gender, as well as sex and province. And specifically to say that the sample of women was benchmarked to the population of 22 million women, and for males it was just over 20 million males. Just some comparison of the statistics. There was quite a good comparison between males that participated compared to and females that participated. They were in terms of age variability of just under 2% in terms of differences. And also we can see that in terms of employment, women that participated actually in the survey were more likely compared to males to have tertiary education. But in all other levels of education, the statistics were comparable, except slightly more males that had secondary education compared to females. In terms of employment status, women, as we know, were less likely to be employed, 64% of women that participated were unemployed compared to 43% among males. Now we come to the parts where we get to the specific results of different forms of gender-based violence, and I hand over to my colleague, Dr. Zungu.
Good morning. I'm shorter than Kangelana. I'm going to share information on the prevalence of gender-based violence. And as Professor Zuma has indicated, we used the WHO questionnaire to measure different forms of violence. Firstly, as you will see on the slide, we measured physical violence, and how it was measured, we used 5 questions, and those questions wanted to know if a woman had been slapped by a partner or something had been thrown at them in order to hurt them, if they've been pushed, if a partner had hit them with a fist or with something else that could hurt them, if they've experienced being kicked, dragged, beaten, choked, or burned. And all these questions that I'm going through were asked from men and both women. We also measured sexual violence, and sexual violence was measured using 4 questions. The first question wanted to know if a male had coerced, forced, or manipulated their current partner or previous wife to have sex when they didn't want to, had sex with a current partner or previous wife or girlfriend when they knew that that person did not want to have sex, coerced, forced, manipulated a current partner or previous wife or girlfriend to watch pornography when they didn't want to. That one was specific for males, so this was only asked for men, not for women. Then the last question is on coerced or forced or manipulated their partner or previous wife or girlfriend to do something that is sexual that they didn't want to. So those are the main questions that we use to measure the different forms of violence. And the last form of violence that we'll look at is both physical and sexual. That is where we combine. Now, here we are. We have reached that point where we will share the results with you. I'm not sure what's happening with the slide. Okay, it's taking a little bit longer to update this side. So that is the prevalence of gender-based violence in the country among women aged 18 years and older. We could not go lower. So in most WHO studies will start at age 15, and go up to the age 49. But as we indicated, we started at 18, but we had an opportunity to extend the study to also look at women and men over the age of 50. So that is something that is innovative, and it helps us to be able to talk about violence beyond just the reproductive health age. So you will see that if you look at the top part of the slide, you are looking at all women. So it's all women are combined in that slide. On top, it's the prevalence over a period of 12 months. So we are talking about incidence. And you'll see that the incident was lower than what we had expected in the study when we were undertaking it. For physical violence that happened 12 months prior to the study, we found 6.1%. And at the bottom of that block, you will see that we've provided a number that shows you how much we are, the number that we are estimating at a population level. And you'll see that we're talking about just over 1.3 million women who have experienced physical violence in that period of 12 sexual violence in a period of 12 months. And then when we combine the two, we found that the prevalence was 7%. If you go lower, then you will see that we're now talking about lifetime about when we get to intimate partner violence. So lifetime violence, we found that 33.1% of women indicated that they had experienced physical violence in a lifetime. For sexual violence, that was 9.8%. And for the combined, which is physical and sexual violence, the prevalence was 35.5%. We'll now go to intimate partner violence, which often we refer as IPV. That is in the middle of the slide. And you will see that for recent, which is the past 12 months, the physical IPV was 5.2%. So that is what we found. For sexual violence, we found 2.5%, and when we combine the two, we found 6.4%. But when we look at lifetime, you'll see that number is higher because we are looking at people through the life course. PV was 7.9% and 23.9%. So that is the prevalence of IPV, and we are focusing on lifetime. So the side that is orange on the screen is presenting data for men. So what I presented was for women reporting experiences of IPV. So for men, we focused on perpetration. So we asked them if they had perpetrated these acts of violence, physical, sexual, and physical. And you'll see that in the past 12 months, 2.4% of men indicated that they had perpetrated physical violence. 2.3% indicated that they had perpetrated sexual IPV, and 4% indicated that they had perpetrated both physical and or sexual IPV. And when we look at lifetime, you'll see that 16.7% of men indicated that they have perpetrated physical IPV against their partner. 7.5% for sexual violence. And lastly, which is what Prof. Zuma was talking about, that polyvictimization, where it is 2 forms of violence or more, but in this case we are looking at physical and sexual violence over a lifetime, and that was 20.5%. On the side of the slide, you will see emotional, economic, and psychological, which is measured using controlling behavior. And for emotional violence, for recent, we found that for women it was 10%, and lifetime was 25.1%. And for men, a higher number of men indicated that they had perpetrated emotional violence against their partner, and that figure was 33.6%, and for recent it was 7.2%. Again, in this case, more women had experienced, reported experiencing emotional abuse, while only 7.2% of men indicated that they had perpetrated it. And then when we come to economic abuse, we found that for recent, for women, it was 4.5%, and men who indicated that they had perpetrated economic abuse, there were 5.3%. So there were a higher number of men who indicated that they had perpetrated emotional abuse. And for lifetime, not much differences between men and women. For women, it was 13.1%, and for men, it was 14.8%. And then lastly, we're looking at controlling behavior. And for controlling behavior, we look at it over a lifetime. So we don't have a figure for recent. And it was 57.6% of women indicated that they had experienced controlling behavior, which is psychological abuse, and 77.2% of men indicated that they had perpetrated economic abuse against a partner. We'll move to other forms of violence, and I'm going to go a little bit faster as we are going to be zooming in on who is affected by what in the next slides that I'll be dealing with. So because we couldn't include younger children in the study, we asked adults about a history of child abuse. And for child abuse, we look at 3 categories. We looked at physical, we looked at emotional, and we also looked at sexual abuse. And you will see that for women, 58% of women reported a history of being physically abused, while for sexual abuse, it was lower, and we do suspect that that is underreporting, because when you look at the data from other studies, women tend to have higher rates. But also I need to indicate that for women, we measured it a little bit differently in that we're looking at women before the age of 15, while for men, we are looking up to the age of 18 years. So for men, you will see that high rates of physical abuse happen for a boy child. At 74.6% of men that are interviewed indicating that they have experienced physical abuse as a child all the way to the age of 18. And then what was striking was the sexual abuse. You'll see that 15.7% of men said that they had a history of being sexually abused. We'll now move to talking more about where are these forms of violence common. So I've given you the figures, and I will now tell you who is the most affected by what. The first form of violence that we look at is recent physical violence. And we found that physical violence was significantly higher among young women aged 18 to 24, 18 to 24, among women 25 to 39 years of age, 35 to 49 years, compared to women who were 50 years and above. Physical violence, that is recent again, was common among women who were cohabiting but not married, compared to those who were married or not currently in a relationship. We also found that recent physical violence was higher among Black women and women who were residing in urban areas. And for sexual violence, again, we've put a figure there so that we remind you of what was the prevalence. It was found that recent sexual violence was more common among women aged 25 to 39, 35 to 49 years, compared to those that were 50 years and older. Again, this marital status of women who were cohabiting and not married, we also saw it here as those women reporting more incidents of sexual violence in a period of 12 months. Lastly, it was also higher among Black women. Then when we combined, which is what we are calling a polyvictimization, physical and or sexual, you'll see that experiences of physical and or sexual violence were higher among women aged 18 to 24, 25 to 39, and 34 years to 49 years, compared to those that were 50 years and above. Again, when we compare by race, more Black women had experienced these two forms of violence, and women who reported that they were cohabiting and not married, compared to those that were married. And this form of violence was higher among women in urban areas compared to the other localities. When we come to lifetime, as I said, we also looked at physical violence over a lifetime. That was common among black women. It was significantly higher among black women. Again, cohabiting women who were not married compared to those who are currently married or not in a relationship. Higher in the age group 18 to 24. That's physical violence. So again, confirming that violence starts early and continues throughout the life cycle. And then when we looked at sexual violence over a lifetime, we found that it was significantly higher among women who were cohabiting and not married. And when we combine the two, physical and or sexual violence, we found that it was higher among women aged 35 to 49 years old compared to those who are 50, higher among black women, and also those that reported that they were cohabiting but not married or currently in a relationship. We'll now move to IPV, so physical and sexual violence. The stats that I was presenting was for all women, and now we are talking about women who have ever had a partner. We found that for recent physical violence among women that had been partnered, that it was significantly higher among women aged 18 to 24, 25 to 34 years, 35 to 49 years compared to the 50 years and above. Again, common among black women when we compare the different races. The cohabiting, again, this marital status, people who are cohabiting but not married, people who had a partner or that they were not cohabiting with, compared to those that were currently married and not in a relationship. So it was higher on those two. And then lastly, we found that recent physical violence was higher among women who had a secondary education compared to those who had a formal. So those that had a secondary schooling were at higher risk. And then for sexual violence, we found that it was higher among women aged 35 to 49 years old compared to those who were 50. And lastly, if we looked at the combined physical and or sexual, it was higher among women 18 to 24 years, 25 to 34 years, and 35 to 49 years. So those three age bands, that's where physical and or sexual violence was reported. Also common among black African women, and again the women that were cohabiting but not married, compared to those that were married and those not currently in a relationship. As we saw with recent physical violence, again here we see education status as a factor, with women with a secondary school having a higher prevalence of physical and or sexual violence compared to those that had a tertiary education. So IPV among ever partnered men. Remember, we said we looked at women, and for women we're looking at victimization, but for men we're looking at perpetration. So where was the numbers of men who had perpetrated violence the highest? And we found that it was significantly higher among men aged 25 to 34 years compared to those that are 50 years and above. Again, we're seeing the same pattern that we saw among women, this cohabiting and not married. So also for perpetration, we see this, the type of relationship or the status of the relationship as a factor also when we're looking at perpetration. For recent sexual violence, it was significantly higher among men who were 18 to 24, 25 to 34, and 35 to 49 years, compared to men who are older, and older defined as 50 years and above. And again, for sexual violence, cohabiting and not being married, and also having a partner but not cohabiting with that partner, we found that those men reported higher prevalence of perpetrating recent sexual violence. Men with a secondary and tertiary education reported higher prevalence of recent sexual violence compared to those that had a primary schooling. So these are areas that our practitioners, prevention activists are needing to be focusing on, linking education, looking at those factors. And then finally, for recent IPV, when we combined the two, physical and sexual violence, we found that it was a higher among men who said that they were between the ages of 18 and 24 years, 25 to 34 years, and 35 to 49 years compared that who were older. So that's the group that indicated that they had perpetrated violence, so their numbers were higher compared to the other age groups. And again, the marital status coming through again, men who indicated that they had perpetrated these forms of violence were likely to be cohabiting, not married, and also those that had a partner but were not cohabiting with that partner. And for education, men with a secondary education reported higher rates of perpetrating recent sexual and or physical violence compared to those that had a primary schooling. For lifetime, we don't see much of a different picture. You see that for physical violence, for women, we're still talking about men. So for lifetime, for men who perpetrated physical violence, the numbers were higher among those aged 25 to 34 and those 35 to 49. Again, those that were cohabiting and not married reported higher rates of perpetrating physical violence over a lifetime. And perpetration of physical violence over a lifetime was higher among men who were residing in urban areas and rural formal areas compared to rural informal. And then for lifetime sexual, you'll see that it was significantly higher among men who were aged 18 to 24, followed by those that were 25 to 34 and also 35 and 49. So all those age groups, it was significantly higher in those groups, and also men with a secondary education compared to those that had a primary education. And when we combine the two forms of violence, which is physical and or sexual, you find that it was higher among black men when we compare it by race, higher among men who said that they were residing in urban areas compared to those in rural formal areas, and higher among men who were not currently in a relationship. So that is lifetime perpetration of IPV. Now we're going to talk about the factors. How do we understand this? How can we explain what we are seeing? And when we look at the factors, we've categorized them into different themes, if I can use that as a qualitative researcher. I'm not sure it's not updating there. Okay. There's something poor, something. So we looked at past sexual relations. Should I wait?
Try again.
Okay. Okay. So we are looking at physical IPV and what factors are associated with physical IPV, and we'll be presenting factors for women, that is for victimization, what puts women at risk of being violated, and also would then look at the factors that are associated with perpetration. So for women, when we look at relationships, we can call them past relationships, we found that having 2 or more sexual partners in a lifetime was found to be significant for women. And I want to explain before I see a headline. This is not concurrent sexual partners, but it's partners over a lifetime. So if you are 40 and you were not married when you were 18 or 20 to your one husband, you would have had other partners during that time. So that's what it says. And it makes sense because if you are being abused in the relationship, you're not going to sit in that relationship. You will move to another relationship. So that was found to be a factor. And for men, it was 4 and above sexual partners over a lifetime. And also, we found that reporting that you've ever engaged in transitional sex. So men who were reporting perpetrating, these are the factors that we found to be significant for perpetration. And for women, now we're talking about alcohol use and substance use. We found that for women, a factor that was associated had to do with alcohol use once or twice a week and a lifetime history of drug use. So those were associated with lifetime physical IPV. And for men, it's being a hazardous drinker of alcohol. What is a hazardous drinker? This is someone who drinks alcohol in a way that puts themselves and others at risk. So when you assess it using particular questions, for men, any score that is higher than 5, that puts them in that category. So those are the men that are at risk of perpetrating physical IPV. The other factors have to do with mental health. And I had a slide on mental health, and if there's time, maybe I will bring it up. But for women, we found that having a mild, moderate, and severe anxiety in the past 2 weeks, having minimal, mild, and moderate, and severe depression was one of the factors, together with a history of suicidal ideation. And for men, when we talk about their risk factors for perpetration, we found that for mental health, these men had a low score on current life satisfaction. They were at a risk of clinical depression, and they also had a risk of suicidal ideation or had attempted suicide. So I see my slides are now updating. The next category or the theme that we looked at was childhood trauma. So perpetration and also victimization was associated with having experienced trauma as a child. For women, it was experiencing physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, and very important, witnessing abuse of a mother by their partner. So it sets one in a pattern and makes them vulnerable as a child to witness parents fighting with each other in the household. And then for men, it was high or medium scores on childhood trauma and being bullied or reporting that they had bullied someone else. So those were important factors for childhood trauma for men. Then when it comes to norms, attitudes, and gender, the ones that we found very significant for women is that women held attitudes that were not equitable. They had the norms that were not equitable, meaning that they agreed with gender relations statements that were actually showing that they held views that were not equitable when it comes to gendered power relations. And the same was seen for men who hold certain stereotypes and agree with certain statements that show that really they do not understand the issues of gender and equality. And then when it comes to relationship dynamics, you'll see that for female it is being in a relationship where there's sometimes or often there's a lot of quarreling. So that was one of the factors. And for men, physical IPV, over a lifetime, one of the risks was food insecurity. So homes that do not have food, so that increases the likelihood of conflict within that household. We'll then talk about sexual violence. I'm going to skip the slide that combines the two and move to non-partner violence, which I know I didn't present the prevalence for it, so we'll talk about it next. So for sexual violence, what are the factors that are associated with the sexual IPV? Remember, this is within the relationships. Again, you'll see that having 2 or more sexual partners for female, daily alcohol consumption over a lifetime, drug use was also a risk for sexual violence. Mild, moderate, severe anxiety in the past 2 weeks, and also having mild, moderate, and severe depression, and a history of suicidal ideation. Childhood trauma also featured, including witnessing your mother being abused by a partner, and also the quarreling was also one of the factors for sexual IPV. And for men, there were 3 factors. A man who's ever engaged in transactional sex, currently scored as being at a hazardous alcohol scale, so that they were in that 5 and above. And then also a history of drug use in the past 12 months. Low empathy for men when we look at mental health, and also at risk of clinical depression, and had attempted suicide. And again, the childhood issues around bullying and also being bullied. So those were the factors that were associated. As I said, I'm not going to present the one that combines it. Most of the factors are the same. And in the interest of time, I'm going to move to emotional abuse. IT, please assist us. Okay. So this is, again, emotional abuse among partnered women, and we'll also talk about it for partnered men. Just to remind you again, for recent, it was 10%, and for lifetime, it was 25.1%.
repeat.
Mhm. Mhm.
With the presentation. Yeah, not the corporate drop. No.
Okay, so I think break my slides back
Bring
and
my
let
slide
me
back.
present.
Organizer.
Okay. Okay, we apologize for challenges with the network. So I will continue. I was going to present data on where economic, together with emotional violence, are the most common. And the chair has just alerted me that I'm running out of time. So I'm going to move quickly to gender norms. I think that would be the most efficient way to use the time that is remaining. So, as I said, when it comes to emotional and psychological abuse, those are the things that we measured. And for psychological abuse, we found that it was higher among 18 to 24-year-olds compared to groups that were older. It was also higher, 25 to 34, and also 34 to 49 years old. Higher among black men for perpetrating it, and again, the cohabiting. But I think what I want to pick up is one of the statements that we measured about controlling behavior. And we asked this among ever-partnered women, and 26.5% of women indicated that their partner gets angry if they speak to another man. 26.2% indicated that their partner insists on knowing where they are at all times. The next higher prevalence was women who indicated that their partner is often suspicious that they're unfaithful, and that was 19.1%. And when it came to men, because we also asked men about their controlling behavior, and as I indicated, the prevalence for controlling behavior was 77.2% over a lifetime. And we found that 44.4% of men believed that when a man wants sex, the partner should agree. 37.7% indicated that they would not let their partner wear certain things, so they control how a woman dress. And then at 32.8%, men reported that they want to know where the partner is at all times. When it comes to gender norms, we also measured them for women and also measured them for men. And in the interest of time, I will only present those that were measured in our men sample. And for norms, we found that 51% of men believed that men need sex more than women, and 54.4% believed that to be a man, you need to be tough. And lastly, 66.6% believe that a woman's most important role is to be a caretaker, to be at home and to cook for their family. What was disturbing when we looked at gendered power relationships, although these were not as high as the ones that I've given you, but 9.9% of men indicated that when a woman is raped, she is usually to blame for putting herself in that situation. So they agreed with that statement. The next one that is also disturbing when it comes to rape culture, 11.9% of men agreed that if a woman doesn't fight physically, then it cannot be rape. So we need to be focusing on those issues. So I'm just going to talk about non-partner violence because I had skipped it initially. When it comes to non-partner violence, this is violence that happens with someone who is not your intimate partner. And for recent experiences of physical violence, we found a prevalence of 3.4%, and non-partner violence was higher among women aged 18 to 24 and 25 to 39 compared to the other age groups, 34 to 49 and 50 years and above. Again, even for non-partner violence, it was highly reported in those that indicated that they were cohabiting compared to those that were married and those that were not currently in a relationship. Physical violence was higher in urban areas. So urban areas was an area where prevalence is higher for recent physical violence. And for sexual violence, the only factor that was significant is that it was higher among black women. And for lifetime, we also see the kind of a picture about where it is most common. But I will then just share the prevalence for non-partner violence, in that for lifetime, physical violence by a non-partner was 24.6%, and for lifetime for sexual violence was 5.9%. And who are the perpetrators of non-partner violence? We found that for physical violence, the family, so a family member at 31.1% was identified as a perpetrator. So this tells us that violence actually is happening within homes. And this is for, remember, it's not IPV, this is non-partner. So we are talking about people who are not partners. The next, a common perpetrator was someone that is known to the woman. It could be a friend, acquaintances. And stranger was only 7.6% of women that said they were physically violated by someone who is a non-partner. And only 1.8% indicated that it was a stranger. And a stranger is defined, could be a teacher, healthcare, religious leader, and so on. Nompendule, in the interest of time, I think I'm not going to present the data, but we do have data on women with disabilities. And what this data showed us was that women with disabilities had a higher prevalence for lifetime, all forms of violence, non-partner violence, IPV, also, if you look at them, all of them was high. The only time we didn't see any difference is when we looked at recent experiences of violence. So between women with a disability and those that did not have a disability, there were not much difference. But for the other categories, they were quite high. And maybe I can just pick one that is concerning, is that when we looked at IPV for women with disabilities, focusing on sexual violence over a lifetime, we find that 14.6% of women with disabilities indicated that they had experienced sexual IPV, compared to women without disabilities, where the figure was 7.2%. So you can see that we're almost talking about double. So I'm not going to dwell onto that because I have to respect the chair. Before we are criticized, because I know people are sitting here, we've talked about men as perpetrators, we've talked about all the other data, but we also looked at men's experiences of violence. And we found that over a lifetime, 1.3% of men indicated that they had perpetrated sexual violence towards another man. So the men that we interviewed, 1.3 of them indicated that they had perpetrated violence against another man. We also asked women, have you ever hit or beaten your partner when your partner was not hitting or beating you? And 7.8% of women indicated that they had done that. And lastly, when we look at men's experiences of violence, we found that physical and sexual violence as adults, 20.4 men said that they had recently experienced physical violence outside their home. 2.3% indicated that they experienced lifetime sexual violence. 14.2% indicated that they'd been punched or hit. 13.5% indicated that they'd been threatened with a knife or another weapon, and 9.8% indicated that they'd been threatened with a gun. So I'm going to quickly move towards concluding the study. I think the most important thing is that we now have a baseline data that we can work with. We have data that shows us where we are in the past 12 months, but also what women have gone through over a lifetime. And that becomes important, especially when we're looking at issues of mental health. How does our data compare to other studies and a global estimate? When we looked at IPV over a lifetime, and here we are talking about physical and or sexual, we found that the global prevalence estimate is 27%, and the Africa region one is 33%, and our study found 23.9%. So we are under both the global and also the Africa region estimates. For IPV, and here we are talking about physical and or sexual for recent, we found that the global average is 13% and Africa region is 20%, and we found 6.4%. Sexual violence, we were at the same level as the regional and also the global estimate. Our estimate was 5.9%. And when we combined the both IPV and NSPV, we found that at the global levels, 31%, regional it's 36%, and when we combined what I showed you, physical and sexual violence, we are sitting at 35.5%. So what I want to also underscore is that the data from WHO looks at the different age. So some might argue that we are not comparing apples and apples, in that our study looks at 18 and above, while WHO looks at 15 to 49. So those are the differences that you need to think about. Then in terms of recommendations, we have a comprehensive set of recommendations, and because of time, I'm just going to talk to the themes. Number one, you have seen what we have presented. As a take-home message, the data is telling us that violence starts early. The experiences of violence start early, as you saw the age groups there. It also tells that victimization and perpetration of violence goes all through the life cycle, because we are seeing also prevalence among women and men over the age of 50. It also showed us that childhood trauma plays a very important role in us understanding victimization, but also perpetration. The data also showed us that women and men who are cohabiting but not married had higher prevalences of gender-based violence. There was higher rates of physical and sexual IPV among men residing in urban areas, and that gender-based violence was actually higher among younger Black African women. And that says that we need to do a lot of work around partners of young women. The key factors that were identified is that GBV is linked to substance use. We include high-risk drinking, engaging in transactional sex, poor mental health, childhood trauma, holding these attitudes that are inequitable, and also gender relations and food security, all these play a role for IPV for men. We have deeply ingrained social norms and power dynamics that are often reinforced by tradition and culture. And for us to move our response or make a difference, we need to make sure that we address these two aspects. Disturbingly, when you look at the slides that will be shared with you, you'll see that there's a high rate of knowledge around laws, up to 80%, 70%, and so on. But it seems that even though you have these high levels of knowledge, there's a disconnect between what people know and how they act. In terms of what needs to happen, we are calling for a comprehensive and collaborative approach. We had already started it. We started the journey with the NSP, working together, government, civil society. And we are saying these results should reignite us, help us to calibrate what we have been doing, and we move together using evidence. We need to implement the interventions and the recommendations at individual level, interpersonal level, community, and also societal level. To do this, we need services that focus on enhancing interventions, especially bringing together the substance, mental health, together with gender-affirming care. So GBV cannot stay there on the side. We need to make sure that we are integrating these services. Child protection, you saw stats for childhood trauma, sexual abuse, and so on. So it's important for us to strengthen childhood protection, but also look at family support. We need to make sure that our families are very strong. Education and community-based intervention, those need to come together, because child comes from the family but is sent to school. From school we go to work. So all these spheres of where we spend our life need to work together. We need legal and enforcement services to also be strengthened and work together. Research and policy development is going to be critical, especially around the evidence on the need for early prevention, children, families being the center of gender-based violence. And also we need the economic cluster, our donors all need to come together to be able to fund a response to the recommendations. Our recommendations are grouped into 8, and I'm not going to go through it because of time, but the first area where we are looking at to intervene, we are asking that we implement interventions that address psychological and social behavioral factors, and I've named them. You saw those factors. Number 2, we implement early learning prevention initiatives. So we start early with anti-violence messages, rights for children. So as early as they are at school, we need to be ensuring that we change that messaging. Economic empowerment, very important, especially the results that are talking to economic violence. We really need to ensure that there is strengthening of women's capacity to be able to support themselves, but also families. When you look at food insecurity, talks to the issues of structural drivers of gender-based violence. So we have to address poverty. Transforming gender norms, very critical. Improving support services and coordination. Enhance monitoring of GB laws. That needs to happen. So we need to make sure that we understand this gap between what people know and how they act. And lastly, we are calling Minister and Deputy Minister for a long-term holistic approach to curbing gender-based violence. It cannot be these meal piece kind of approaches, but we need to look at a long term. And we also need to make sure that we understand our history and where we come from and how that could have gotten here what we are. So intergenerational kind of interventions that are looking at generational violence and how we are passing that on. I would be very amiss if I don't take the opportunity as I close to thank the donors who have been critical for this work. And it's unfortunate that I cannot show their logos on the screen, but it's a DSI. It's now called DSI. DSTI. Department of Science, Technology and Innovation. And our own home, which is the HSRC. And linked to these two institutions, we were supported by a grant that came via DSTI that came from the European Union. Melinda and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they came on board and ensured that we supported the Ford Foundation and also UN Women. Those that were our funders. I want to thank all the representatives from the funders, Francois, Modikwe, Humutso, Nikki, Ayanda, Matsidiso, Natalie, Africa, Loveness, Moline, and Puleng, for all the support during the time that we've been working on the study. Government representatives, especially the private office of the president, led by Dr. Olive Shusana, Ms. Tamara Bram, Sbongile Mtembu, Namhlamniki Mangaliso, Ayanda Zwane, and Hasha Dayal. The team that has done this work spent long hours, not only in the field, but actually pulling together this report, led by myself and Professor Zuma, Dr. Natisha Duki, Dr. Zainu Peterson, Dr. Wadia Parker, Dr. Tawanda Makusha, Dr. Musawenkosi Mabaso, Ms. Ronel Sopol, Dr. Imbarani Naidu, Ms. Nada Adelatif. Those are our collaborators from the SAMRC, by the way. We didn't do this work alone. We also were joined by the SAMRC colleagues and also UCT. And lastly, Dr. Terali Reddy, who's also a director of the States Unit at MRC. We thank that march that brought us all together under the banner of shutdown. And
thank you very much, Dr. Zungu. It is a pandemic. And Dr. Tedros, the Director General of the World Health Organization, stated on the 9th of March 2021 that unlike COVID-19, violence against women cannot be stopped with a vaccine. But while scientists and researchers like yourself, Dr. Zungu, and Prof. Zuma, and the collective you've worked with, have attempted to do research, to use science, to see how we can bring an end to the scourge, I think we are contesting what Dr. Tedros, the DG of the World Health Organization, is saying about COVID, or about the pandemic, gender-based violence, not being a pandemic that we can overcome within an hour. And I don't think there is any amount of time that could be sufficient for us to put our heads together and see how we bring an end to this pandemic. We have already circulated the presentation that Dr. Zungu presented. If you don't have it, please do indicate. We will share it with yourselves. And as of now, I think the study is no longer embargoed. I think we can share it. And so we will be sending it we will be making sure that it is available on the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities website, as well as on the HSRC's website. Colleagues, gender mainstreaming is a cornerstone of achieving equity. Yet it faces significant challenges, including inadequate funding. In this context, the contributions of donors and partners shine as a beacon of hope, enabling transformative projects like the first South African National Gender-Based Violence Study to have happened. I'd like to allow Dr. Hazel Gooding, Deputy Representative of the United Nations Women South Africa and Multi-Country Office, to come and share just 2 to 5 minutes of a reflection on why it was so important for the UN Women to be part of such a groundbreaking study. Thank you so much. Can we give her a round of applause?
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Honorable Minister, Deputy Minister, representative from the Office of the President, Prof. Shazana, distinguished colleagues from HSRC, our dear partners, as well as representatives of women's organizations and civil society present here today, our esteemed multi-country office based here in Pretoria, and it is an honor for us to be a part of this significant event at the launch of South Africa's first study of its kind on the prevalence of gender-based violence across all 9 provinces of this country. Before I begin, let us take this opportunity to acknowledge all the women and girls who are not able to be with us here today because of gender-based violence. I also want to acknowledge and recognize all the survivors of this human rights violation, as well as the brave feminists, gender activists, who to show courage, that continue to fight, that continue to advocate and speak out for themselves and for those that cannot fight or speak for themselves. Program Director, this study has been a 4-year journey, starting with the preparation of the survey's work plan and team formation in August of 2020. UN Women is very excited to have been a part of this journey. I know it has not been an easy one, and so we thank you for your hard work. With only a few years left before the 2030 mark of the Agenda for Sustainable Development, the urgency of eliminating violence against women and girls across the globe has never been greater. The UN Women's Gender Snapshot 2023's report indicates that 245 million women and girls worldwide continue to face physical and/or sexual violence from their intimate partner each year. Our data tell us that 86% of women and girls live in countries without strong protections against violence, or in countries where data are simply not available. Ladies and gentlemen, we have agreed as part of the international community that it's a woman's right to live free from violence. As we know, it's upheld by international agreements such as the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, commonly known as CEDAW, and the 1993 UN Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women. Yet, only 40% of women we know globally seek help of any sort after experiencing violence. UN Women therefore advocates for and supports women's and girls' access to quality multi-sectoral services essential for their safety, protection, and recovery, particularly for those who already experience multiple and intersectional forms of discrimination. We partner with governments, UN agencies, civil society organizations, as you know, and other entities to find ways to prevent violence against women and girls, focusing on advocacy. Prevention is still the most cost-effective, long-term way to stop violence. As part of UN Women's comprehensive approach, we also work with partners to enhance data collection and analysis, such as with the HSRC, to provide a better understanding of the root causes, magnitude, and the cost and consequences of violence against women and girls to our societies at large. Researchers have agreed over the years that violence against women and girls is multidimensional, multi-causal, and various organizations have over the years implemented violence prevention interventions involving a whole of society approach addressing the underlying drivers of violence to prevent it before it occurs. UN Women is currently using that evidence that is needed. Will provide the information on victimization and the most prevalent forms of gender-based violence in South Africa across all genders. We expect that it will assist the country to understand what parts of the population is mostly affected by gender-based violence, past and current by sex, gender, age, locality, and province, to name a few. We expect that it will provide additional data on what the drivers of GBV are in our context and inform interventions and policies. We expect that it will increase our understanding of the economic impact of GBV on women and those who identify as women, their families, and their communities. We expect that it will increase our understanding of perpetration of and experiences of gender-based violence by men and those who identify as men. And last but not least, that the data will serve as a critical building block towards establishing a national gender-based violence surveillance system. Ladies and gentlemen, as we continue to work together to end gender-based violence, let's continue to be informed by the evidence with which this research provides. Let us challenge ourselves to be the ones to be emulated when it comes to implementation. Allow me to conclude with the words of the UN Women's Executive Director, Seema Bahous, who has stated that, and I quote, "It is time to get serious and fund what we know works to stop violence against women and girls. Invest in reforming and implementing laws and multi-sectoral policies. Provide services to survivors. Scale up evidence-based prevention interventions. With the will and contributions of all stakeholders and sectors, we can unlock financing, track budget allocations, and increase gender-responsive budgeting. We have the solutions and resources to end violence against women and girls. In our lifetimes, it is our choice." I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gooding from the United Nations Women. The Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities is mandated to lead socio-economic transformation and promote empowerment and participation of women, youth and persons with disabilities in South Africa through mainstreaming advocacy, monitoring and evaluation. It is mandated to provide strategic leadership, coordination and oversight to government departments and the nation in integrating empowerment programs for these groups. It is mandated to create a transformed, inclusive society free from all forms of discrimination, enabling self-actualization for all individuals. It is on that basis that the department, in the Presidency for Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, assumes the responsibility of custodianship of the first South African National Gender-Based Violence Study, a baseline survey on victimization and perpetration. To receive officially the study that was done by the HSRC, I call to the podium Honorable Sindisiwe Chikunga, the Minister in the Presidency responsible for women, youth and persons with disabilities. DG, would you like to join the picture? Oh, she's on.
Honorable Deputy Minister, Ms. Mapaseka Steve Litsike, Advocate Maluleke, Director General of the Department, Dr. Nompumelelo Zungu, Principal Investigator, Dr. Zuma, also Principal Investigator, the entire Human Science Research Council team, Professor Oliver Shisana, Social Policy Special Advisor, esteemed representatives of the media present here today, Dr. Gordon from UN Women, distinguished guests, fellow South Africans. We are deeply honored on behalf of the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities to formally receive the South African National Gender-Based Violence Prevalence Study, a baseline survey on victimization and perpetration conducted by the Human Science Research Council. This groundbreaking study, the first of its kind in our nation, offers Africa. The release of this study is timely as it coincides with our preparations for the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, an international campaign that rallies all of society to reflect on the past, ongoing, and intersectional ways in which violence against women is reproduced at systemic, structural, household, and individual levels. I must emphasize the fact that the fight against gender-based violence is a 365 days campaign, but also a task that we do every day. The grim picture painted by our study affirms the UN Secretary General's observation that we are indeed living through a millennia of patriarchy, where violence against women, including femicide, is at epidemic levels. It also echoes President Ramaphosa's clarion call for gender-based violence to be addressed with the same urgency and seriousness as a pandemic. Your findings have clearly shown that the killing of Maria Makgato and Lokadia Ndlovu, both of whom were later fed to pigs, is more of a norm than exception. You have confirmed our long-standing observation that most violence against women is not committed by strangers, but by their current or former husbands and intimate partners. This reality is particularly disheartening and challenging to prevent, as it occurs in spaces where individuals naturally let their guard down. The findings of this study should only serve as a source of shame, but also a call of immediate action. The findings and recommendations of the study will contribute to our ongoing focus on prevention, enhanced protection for victims, and ensuring that perpetrators are held accountable. As a department, we are currently preparing for our 5-year strategic planning session. We will not only invite the team behind this work to present at the session, but also incorporate their recommendations into our 5-year strategic plan. We need community intelligence on this complex subject, researchers, scholars, advocates, and activists who will go beyond reproducing mainstream narratives and get a granular picture from communities that face violence at a community or even street level to ensure that justice is served. This study is therefore a baseline from which more research will be conducted at micro levels. One of the first actions required is to challenge and deliberately repurpose all values and practices across educational, religious, cultural, sporting, and creative environments to support the fight against patriarchal chauvinism in all spheres of life. We must influence the content and delivery of school curricula to nurture our youth who reject the patriarchal script and the violence it perpetuates in every aspect of life. In addition to promote awareness, our department will be responsible for integrating the study's findings into the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. This includes recalibrating existing policies and programs to align with the evidence presented in the study. It is important to mention that the study confirms that we are implementing the pillars of the National Strategic Plan, particularly Pillar 6, which is about research and information management systems. So yes, we are implementing our National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. We will also continue to mobilize funding from both public and private sector sources to ensure that our interventions against gender-based violence and femicide are adequately resourced. Support for civil society will be crucial in this regard. In response to the study, we intend convening all social partners and agree on who is responsible for taking some of the recommendations forward. In this case, we mean government, civil society, research institutions, academia, private sector, and everybody else that will play an important role in ensuring that the recommendations are implemented. The sheer scale of the challenge requires an all-of-society approach. We will ensure that we simplify the findings of this study without diluting it. We'll do this as much as possible so that it can be understood by all in South Africa. As we continue to observe Disability Rights Awareness Month, which started on the 3rd of November up until the 3rd of December, we take this opportunity to shine a spotlight on the often overlooked prevalence and gender-based violence against women with disabilities. This study informs us that women with disabilities experience gender-based violence and femicide more than abuse. Women with gender-based violence experience this at 29.3% against women without at 21.7%. Sexual abuse for women with disabilities, it is at 14.6% as Dr. said, against 7.2% for women without. Physical and or sexual abuse for women with disabilities, it is at 31.2% versus 23.2%. This study therefore confirms that women with disabilities who can neither hear, neither see, nor talk, and for these women, they therefore have to undergo and experience this gender-based violence, and most often than not, justice is almost always denied to them. The final week of DREM, which is the Disability Rights Awareness Month, will focus on the security of persons with disabilities, addressing both natural and human-made disasters, including the pervasive threat of gender-based violence and femicide. This study helps us to base our actions on this area and this sector of our population on scientific findings. The master's house. We need new tools and we need them urgently. We will not tinker on the edges. Clearly, our message is one: men must stop abusing women. They must just stop it. And the 7% of women who are abusing their men, they must just stop it. We cannot be a violent nation. We can live peacefully together as South Africans. On behalf of government, we extend our heartfelt gratitude to the following donors, as just been mentioned by the doctor, whose unwavering support made this groundbreaking study possible. The United Nations Development Programme, European Union Delegation to South Africa, United Nations Women, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Open Society Foundation, Ford Foundation, Soul Sister Soul have omitted. I apologize, but we thank you. I would like to take this opportunity to really thank Professor Olive Shisane, the Social Policy Special Advisor to the President, for all the effort that made this project possible. But we also thank you, ma'am, for the support that you are giving us continuously. We also want to thank the Gender-Based Violence and Femicide Brigades or response teams from Hammaskral that are here, that decided to join us today. We value your presence here. We thank Dr. Nompumelelo Zungu, as well as Professor Zuma, the principal investigators and researchers, and the entire Human Science Research Council team. This is the team behind this research. They are experienced in such researches. Remember, in South Africa, we are where we are when it comes to HIV and AIDS, with the treatment that we're able to give to our people today. We thank them for their scientific-based contributions so that we're able to be where we are. So indeed, they're a team of highly experienced researchers. I want also to thank the media. We really thank you for being here today, for joining us today. But of course, we ask you to work with us as we fight this gender-based violence and femicide. We believe it can be stopped working together with the media. Finally, I would like to also to thank His Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa for elevating our nation's war on gender-based violence and femicide as a major priority of our government. Together, we will end gender-based violence, and I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Sindisiwe Chikunga, the Minister in the Presidency responsible for women, youth, and persons with disabilities. At this point in time, we'll then move into our question and answer session, where we'll afford members of the media to pose questions to our panel that includes Minister Chikunga, Deputy Minister Litzike, Director General Maluleke, Dr. Zungu, Prof. Zuma, Prof. Shisana, and Ms. Maluleke. You know, I used to say, Minister, in the portfolio committee, when I'm in a room full of profs and doctors, I always feel like I must be careful because they don't want to be called Miss when it's a doctor and Prof when it's a doctor, or the other way around. So with that being said, I'd like to open around to the room, to any members of the media that have any questions for our panel. I'd like the DG to please come to join us on the stage. You can just take my seat, DG. Can the members of the media please introduce themselves and indicate which media house they are from? Yes, ma'am. 2, 3. Okay, so we have 3 for now. Please introduce yourself.
According to these stats, if we look here, I think when it comes to recent sexual violence, it translates to around 400,000 women who would have experienced sexual violence in a period of 12 months. About 10,000 sexual offences each quarter in the region of that. That's just an estimate. So then we're looking at about 40,000 instances of sexual offences being reported to the police taking place. I just want to get some comment on how concerning that is and what we can actually do to genuinely, because this has been an issue, an ongoing issue for so long, what we can actually do to encourage victims of sexual offences and sexual violence to actually go to police, why they're not doing it at this point, and where the gaps there are, please.
Thank you very much, Bernadette. The second hand is down here. Kosnati.
Kosnati Shazi from Power FM News. I have 3 questions, 3 sets of questions. The first 2 is directed to the Minister. The Minister says to ensure that they're implemented But I just wanted to find out, Minister, is a potential GBV surveillance system currently in the works, just with regards to this? The reason why I'm asking is because the Department of Justice signed an MOU with, regarding child maintenance. So if you are a parent and you're not maintaining your child, when you come up credit profiles, you will be listed as someone who does not maintain their child. So I just wanted to find out, is a GBV surveillance system currently under works? My second question is the 16 days of activism. GBV is declared a pandemic, but the 16 days, does that activism days, does it contribute towards non-violence? Does it actually play a role, or is it just a talk shop where we say, "Kule 16 days, let's be activists"? Does it actually play a role in minimizing GBV? And then my last question is to the HSRC. Apologies for playing devil's advocate, but I did not see stats regarding women on men GBV. I just wanted to find out, do those stats exist, or is it because it's minimal? So any stats on women perpetuating violence on men? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nkosinathi. Ahead at the back. Sorry, can you kindly repeat your name, Mama Shang?
Just clarity on how the study was conducted. Was it online, or were the participants given questionnaires physically?
Was it online? Sorry, they didn't hear the question properly. Can you just repeat it?
How was the study conducted? How did the participants get to answer those questions, some of the questions that were on the questionnaire?
Okay. Are those the only three that we have at the moment? All right, so we have 3 questions. The first one is around underreporting. Numbers we have vis-a-vis what is reported. That comes from Bernadette News 24. Perhaps colleagues will indicate who has appetite for it. Then we have Nkosinathi from Power News. What is Minister going to do post receiving this study? And how are we making sure that we're supporting women or mothers who are not supported in terms of maintenance? And then 16 days of activism, is it an impactful campaign or not? And then from Mahlangu from Channel Africa, asking how the study was conducted. That's a very powerful question. Thank you very much to all of you for your questions. And at this point in time, I'd like to hand over to our panel. We'll end with Minister. So we'll end with Minister, DM, and DG. So DG will be the third last. So we can start with yourselves, perhaps. Prof. Shisana, would you like to start? Any inputs? Okay.
Okay. From the presidency, we found that it was absolutely critical to implement Pillar 6 of the National Strategic Plan, because all along we're focusing on data that came in from the police. And we know that many women do not go to the police when they've got a problem. They don't report. They try to deal with it within the home. They try to deal it with their friends. They try to address a situation with a perpetrator. So few actually go to the police. So it's not a surprise that the figures that we have are actually much more than if you went to the police, because you are sampling a population in a representative way. You are picking up a problem that may never have reached the police. So it's very important that this study be used now to recalibrate the information that we have so we plan better. And to me, that is absolutely critical. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that the HSRC has mentioned that women are also violent. Let us remember that. It's very important. if we're going to deal with gender-based violence, as the minister said, we have to deal with violence wherever it comes from. We have to. So that is a change on our national strategy on gender-based violence, because we are always concentrating on men. The study that we see here, very interesting, very small proportion of men say that they are perpetrating violence against women. That is very, very important. And the proportion of gender-based violence in the country is not as big as we said insofar as incidents. It's high insofar as lifetime, because the state has to take care of all of the wounded people on gender-based violence. But I don't know whether the low rate of new gender-based violence cases, I don't know whether those that are new is because of the implementation of the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence. But I would suspect that it played a critical role in ensuring that we are not the highest insofar as gender-based violence in the world. Because if you come up with a figure of 6.1, when everybody has been saying that, gender-based violence in South Africa is so pervasive, we are the rape capital of the world and so forth. We are not. The data has now given us something that we can work on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Pehlang. I think the question on how the study was implemented, it was not implemented online, where a team of data collectors who went to each and every household that was scientifically randomly selected. They conducted the interview, a face-to-face in a confidential space between the researcher and the respondent. Only the questions, few questions whereby on some questions among males that was responded to by males where they completed the questionnaire themselves. But all questions were asked by a researcher to the respondent. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the questions. I think most of them have been covered by Prof. Even Minister 7.8%. So that was covered. But what I wanted to talk to from the researcher's point of view around the issue of surveillance, someone asked about surveillance. I think it's long coming, and we have been missing the important piece, the prevalence study. Then we have also data that's coming from programs, your NGOs, the police, and so on. So I think this now gives, especially Pillar 6, who has been working on coming up with a dashboard that would be able to access and see where we are sitting with gender-based violence across the country. So I think this is a really step forward to take us through that. But I'm sure government will also have their own take on the matter. But I'm responding from a researcher point of view. Thank you.
I would like to respond to all the questions. The first one, I think it was Benedette from News 24 about the reporting status. I think this is a challenge in South Africa, because even the National Director of Public Prosecution has been complaining that the reporting of sexual offences is at 8%. So it's around what you've been saying, 40% and 400. I think there are many reasons for that. The research has already shown that about 34% of sexual offences and other violences are from the family members. So if somebody is abused within the family most of the time, they hide. They want to hide the embarrassment that has been caused. But there are many other reasons. Some of the women stay with a perpetrator who is the one who provides meal and all those things. I'm not saying those are the only reasons, but I'm saying there are many reasons. When Dr. Zungu was presenting, she indicated that economic empowerment needs to be addressed. I think the other thing that was asked, I think it was Nkosinati, was on maintenance. Maintenance, and you spoke about listing. Unfortunately, the Act as it stands now, it doesn't empower the courts. to be able to list the defaulters. I think if the Act can be properly amended, it has been amended twice, but it still didn't assist. If it can be amended properly, it will resolve half of the problems of maintenance and the case have because of food. So it's important that issues of maintenance are addressed. On the issue of 16 days of activism, 16 days of activism is a way of highlighting what government is doing to address gender-based violence. And it has worked because now everybody's aware of gender-based violence. Everybody's aware that slapping someone is violence. Even though that say it's a right for a woman to sleep with them when they do not want to, they know that it is wrong. It's just that they do that because they've been doing it always. I think yeah, I think these are the ones. The others have been responded to. Thank you.
Sorry, can I just check with Chief Director? She'd like to add anything?
Thank you so much. I want to revisit the question about police statistics. There's a much more bigger technically in terms of what kind of data police collect, because it's not aligned to the legislation in terms of variables and indicators. For instance, when they collect, a good example is an indicate sorry, I forgot the acronym. It hides, apart from law reporting, it hides certain indicators like what the study shows us in terms of sexual violence, physical violence. So they don't have that breakdown. So oftentimes it doesn't really show. So I think it's a significant point to remember when it comes to police statistics. So it's actually very limited in terms of, and it's creating, a problem, as I say, because it doesn't give a good picture of it. Hopefully, this study, we may have to revisit with SAPS, police, and see if we can align in terms of the findings of the study. Thank you.
I saw a hand. Mr. Silala, do we have time for one more question? Two. All right. Those will then go to the minister because she's the last person who will speak. But what minister doesn't take DM will capture in her closing remarks.
Good day, my name is Kilelu Duma from High FM. The study shows that there's a high prevalence of gender-based violence for Black women. I just wanted to get the sense whether is it that other racial groups were not profiled or sampled? Why is it that the study shows that there's prevalence among those groups? Why is that?
All right. The other one. I saw another hand go up. Was I mistaken? All right. We're closing now. That's the last question. We agreed? We all agree. All right. We'll have to bring back Dr. Zuma, Prof. Zuma or Dr. Zumu for that one.
Thank you so much. All the race groups were sampled. They were included in the sample. So what I was presenting is where it is significant. So when we share the report, you'll be able to see all the prevalence for different race groups. And also the numbers for the different race groups were not as high. So we had to combine them into the other race groups. So in some of the tables, we might see them as other. So where it was significant, it will tell you that this was not significant by race, so race didn't play a role. But where it's significant, that is where we were presenting. But really, I want to underscore this message. We are not stigmatizing Black women, but we are saying that this is what the data is saying, and we are praying and hoping that in how it is reported, we really are sensitive around those issues, because it's about intervention, it's about identifying risk, and where we should be working, because you cannot just look at the women, look at where they come from, how do they, get transported. So all these other issues that put black women at risk is what we should be focusing on for us to be able to reduce risk. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Zungu. I'd like to now ask Minister to come forth for any DM. All right, DM, your reflections. What we caucused is being overwritten by the Minister.
Well, I think let me appreciate the questions that were raised. One of the things that both Minister and Prof. Zuma and Dr. Zungu raised was that this household survey, it's also adding on the body of work of many research that have taken place in our country, which were in small scales. Now, the question that was raised by Benedict, it's a fair question. Now, historically, there was a research done that was called 1 in 9. That says out of 9 women, only 1 gets to report a case. And it does not mean that when this case is reported, it reaches the level of conviction. Now, you would also understand there was another study that was done on levels of empowerment, even on LGBTI persons. Out of 25 LGBTI people, 1 only gets to report the case, which is already telling you 88% don't report. So we do have an under-reporting that takes place. But there are many factors. Others would also include the secondary victimization that many people experience when going to report. So there is an issue around what is happening even at the reporting level. The second other issue, it's around redress, justice. If we don't see a lot of cases being, reaching that level of conviction, being persecuted, the perpetrators being persecuted for that matter, it really does create a challenge for us. But the research is saying there's this prevalence, there are level of incidents. Now we need to, in the efforts that we have to be dealing with, and our minister was talking about the action and the call to action that comes from this report, says that act more, do it fast to respond to that. And maybe the one other part I want to touch before I sit down for the minister to speak, it's around the 16 days. I think this was a question raised about what role does 16 days of activism play. I want you to acknowledge that as a country, we have committed to 365 days of violence against women, giving it attention. 16 days is a global awareness day. It forces all of us to reflect on what we have been doing with the rest of the year. But it does play a role because the recalibration, calling all members of society to continuously raise awareness, continuously challenge the power dynamics that exist in society. It's quite important to realize that all partners are also putting a much closer look at this period. So we should not dismiss it, and we should also think about whether this period there's a reduction of incidents that are taking place. Of course, we've seen some reporting, but it doesn't take away from what had happened during COVID, when this study was also even being conducted. When everybody was closed in their homes with their partners, with their families, we saw an increase of violence against women, violence against persons. So we need to analyze this, and I think we are grateful that we've got scientists who completely use, mathematical way to estimate, to focus on research, to collect data that helps us to understand some of the challenges we're dealing with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the questions have been responded to. Maybe I will just add one or two things, particularly on the issue of 16 days asked and directed to the minister. Because on the maintenance, I think the DG responded to that question very well. 365 days, we fight against gender-based violence. But these things compete. Throughout the year, it will either be gender-based violence, but also it will be water, it will be electricity, and so on. But during this time, we heighten this. We make the whole of South Africa to focus on this sketch because it has to be fought by everyone. And we're able to reflect, as the DM has just been saying, to reflect on what we have done from the previous year to where we are now, whether we have achieved or not. And this study, for instance, is saying to us, we've been able to conduct a study which is Pillar 6, and we are now able to report to South Africans on the basis of a scientific study that this is where we are as a country. And I think that is important, and therefore we are reporting back to the community and to society during this time. But what is important is whether it is reducing or not. The first thing that is important for me is awareness, that people of South Africa are aware that gender-based violence is wrong. They are now aware that beating a partner is wrong. For whatever reasons, it is wrong. And I think that is important. It is important for people, even those who do it, for them to know that what they are doing at the time when they are doing it, that it is wrong. I think that is an important fact, and therefore awareness is important. But of course, prevention is equally important. And therefore we take stock at this time to say, how far are we? We look at the resources that we spoke about in our input to say, do we have adequate resources? Whether you speak money, you speak human, you speak technology even. Because today we can actually even use technology to fight the sketch. Are we moving together with other parts of the world when it comes to technology? What women can use if they are attacked because they are women, when they are raped because they are women? Is there anything that they can use in terms of technology, artificial intelligence, that can assist them to prevent that? So we're looking at all those things. How far are we as a country? So yes, indeed, this is very important. Of course, South Africa is a member of the United Nations, and therefore if United Nations 16 days, indeed we've got to participate as a country. But indeed, it is the time where every South African, particularly the perpetrators, in this case men, if I have a problem with my partner, I will find a way. If I've got to leave, please leave. If you've got to stay in that relationship, find a way of dealing with the issues, but it can never be a physical abuse. It can never be about beating. And I think this is an important message going to even our children, to say, as you grow up, you will be disappointed by your partners for many reasons, but violence is not the answer. And therefore, if you think you can't cope with that relationship, leave it peacefully and you will find another relationship. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to our Minister, the Deputy Minister, Prof. Shisana, Prof. Zuma, Dr. Zungu, our Director General Advocate Maluleke, our Chief Director, Ms. Esther Maluleke, for contributing to the responses from the questions, from the floor. Colleagues, we do encourage that we continue to have conversations around the study. Please do feel free to contact any of the media persons in the various, in our department as the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, or with the HSRC. From our department, the spokesperson in the ministry is Nompendulo Mkadra. The Director of Communications in the department is Mr. Kesha Silala. From the HSRC, we have Dr. Laki Ditaonyane, and we have Adziliwi Nematandani. And you are more than welcome to the study. At this point in time, I'd like to ask Deputy Minister Steve Litzike to weave the conversation we've had this morning, which was one, to bring to South Africa the study on gender-based violence presented by Dr. Zungu and Prof. Zuma. We then had remarks by our partners and donors represented by UN Women, Dr. Gooding. We then also had questions from yourselves and responses from our panel. And now just to take us forward and indicate, what do we do now that we've had this conversation? What do we do now that we have this groundbreaking study? How do we make sure that the lived realities of the many women and all citizens of South Africa changes? We have, not to put all the pressure on her, of course, to give us a miraculous vaccine to it or a solution to it, but DM, please weave this whole conversation we've had together for us. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, program. I want to really appreciate the Minister for accepting the report on behalf of government, in particular on behalf of the department. I want to also appreciate the principal investigators and the entire team of the Human Science Research Council, together with the board, and also, of course, under the leadership of the CEO in her absentia. I really also want to appreciate the department's team that were support to this work, and Prof. Shisana from the presidency, who also anchored this work. I'm also elevating our development partner, but we had other partners such as the Gates Foundation, who really supported financially to this work. So esteemed representatives of the media present today, distinguished guests, and the GBV brigades who continue to really shine into making sure that persons, particularly women, children, and other vulnerable groups have got the right kind of support that we need. It is an honor that we did receive this report. It's a groundbreaking study, the first of its kind in our nation, that provides an unparalleled understanding of the prevalence, the patterns, and drivers of gender-based violence across South Africa. And I think this report helps us as a department and is linking to the mandate of the department and will strengthen our work to coordinate better all government departments that must do their work effectively. One, to prevent gender-based violence. Secondly, to respond to gender-based violence. Minister, you would be aware that it costs our country and our fiscal 45 billion to respond to gender-based violence. But if we prevent it, it will cost less, and we redirect the funds that are needed for society to job creation, to economic growth that we need. As a country, we don't need more violence. We cannot be the subject that actually causes harm towards its own people. So this evidence that is presented here brings about reality, and a reality that is giving us findings. As we go into this 16 days of activism, we go charged because we understand, of course, epidemic, but our president termed it the pandemic. We understand the pandemic. But what we also understand, because of the body of work in our NSP, we understand our response. So we want to really thank the team from the Human Science Research Council that really brings about the reality of the status of women in the country. I want to highlight some key things that were mentioned.
that 33.1% of women aged between the age of 18 and older have experienced physical violence in their lifetime. And that amounts to 7.3 million women in our country. Another stats, 9.8 have faced sexual violence in their lifetime. That translates to 2.1 million women in our country. And I want to echo what Dr. Zungu said, women in their diversity, so that we don't underscore which one in particular. She later then said we looked closely to women with disability, and that presented an additional statistic. But when we speak generally about women, it's across board, and the intersectional lens was adopted to that. I think it's quite important we understand that. But what was also elevated here is to be able to distinguish the IPV and the non-partnered data that was presented to us. We know definitely the significance that is affecting women. 22.4% the ever partnered women face physical intimate partner violence, and they have experienced it, 3.2 million in their lifetime. And 7.9 ever partnered women reporting experiencing sexual intimate partner violence. And these stats are very important to even understand that who perpetrate violence. And it's very important because sometimes if we don't understand where the perpetration is taking place, we lose out. We lose out the most important information. But majority of these acts are happening in our homes. We need to eradicate this level of violence in our homes. So it's quite important that we realize that. Now, our department is mandated to coordinate this work. We do much more beyond coordination, but to also lead the socio-economic transformation agenda, and we promote women empowerment. As you saw, the evidence that was presented around food security and many other aspects that are the impact indicators. So if we don't address how we transform the socio-economic status of both women and men, we will forever have a cycle of gender-based violence that continues. So it's quite important that we don't just leave out some of the challenges, but we have the responsibility also to provide strategic leadership. And we will continue doing so as we go back to the president, who chairs also a cabinet committee. Minister will be leading us to presenting this call to action. We have an NSP, a 5-year plan that is clearly signaling indicators through the pillars. We need to have all these targets met, and one of them is to look at data, knowledge production, so that we do so very well. But our NSP further speaks about the actions that lead to that prevention and response. And we need to go back to then say who all the players need, or what all the players need to be doing. Beyond government, it's also civil society. We've got key players in communities, organized labor that continues to really raise the bar in responding to gender-based violence. But we're also calling private sector to come on board. We cannot do this work if we do not have the right kind of financing to strengthen all the pillars and all government parties and all civil society in this work. So indeed, having received this report, we now are the custodians to this study and what we need to be doing to be taking this work forward on behalf of government. And we really appreciate HSRC that you've laid the foundation for our knowledge, understanding, but also how we manage the many other dynamics. So we need to look at all kind of comprehensive and integrated plan, driving implementation for government, promoting awareness and advocacy, but also looking at a kind of multi-sectoral coordination effort that will foster change in the work. But most importantly, we want to say also to HSRC, let's not stop here. Facilitating evidence-based put much more resources in terms of knowledge production into this work. So as we reflect on all of this, we are aware that there's significant vulnerability that is faced by women in all their diversity in South Africa. And this vulnerability is compounded by many things as the research presented, but we have to also pay much closer look at other vulnerable groups, including women with disability, which this study revealed that they actually present double the figures that we saw. So we need to make sure that persons with disability are not continuously being locked in the houses, reported in many areas. So what Prof. Pumla Gola has said in the concept of the patriarchy script, which explains how men have been conditioned to feel entitled to women's time, labor, bodies, and more. It's the power dynamics. All of these things that are ranging until men give up and not subject women to violation. It's the power issue. There is no competition between men and women. There is never. But men have to understand that they do not have the right over women's body. That must be understood. You can be partnered, you can share equality, you can share finances, but there is nothing that justifies, nothing that justifies having to violate another person, in particular women. It's criminal in our country. And that we want to encourage all South Africans. For us to do better is when these matters come to be reported. For us to do better is when we act against any kind of violation. For us to do better is to also deal with some of the substance social fabric, deal with the parenting, deal with families, deal with unit issues, but also deal with inequality that exists. So we do have that, and we can do it in South Africa. Our 30 years into democracy have kept us alive with the possibilities that we can do better in the protection of women's rights, of children's rights, and all other vulnerable groups. So, Minister and colleagues, we have a big task. We cannot fail women of this country. Not 30 years later, and not even when women marched in 1956. We can do better. So we have to enhance and strengthen our monitoring and accountability mechanisms, and that's what we're going to do, Somlomo. We're also going to integrate our gender-based violence intervention into the broader social policies, not forgetting some of the correlation. When Prof. Zuma and Dr. Zungu were presenting, the correlation of HIV, because gender-based violence is a driver of the epidemic, you saw this, the interlink with the transactional sex and many other aspects. So there's correlations, and we know over 8 million people living with HIV in our country, but majority, 60% are women. So we need to understand this data very closely, but also look at some of the economic inequality, including the gaps in education that was also linked to the drivers of the violence. We spoke about financing. UN Women and all partners must continue to do so, including our own domestic resources. We must put much more resources to ensure that we don't miss out on the opportunity. But I want to say lastly, science, both medical and social science, is important. And our scientists in this country have demonstrated the capability, the competency that we can use research, science to understand our people. So we need to make sure that science is for the people. We need to make sure that science does not leave people behind. Because if communities own this, the same way we've committed to the brigades, we'll translate this data to make sense to our communities. Simplify it. So that if we're going to stop gender-based violence, we have to make sure that it stops in communities, but communities understand how it can impact their lives. So this study is not just data or blue sky research. It's a lifeline for South Africa. It sheds light on the systematic drivers, but it also helps us in dealing with the harmful practices that we need to overcome in South Africa. So I want to really thank all the key stakeholders that contributed, and of course to say that well done to the team of HSRC, and I hope we can give them that round of applause for doing this work. This research is aligned to our government plan of action. This research is also aligned to the ANC resolutions of 55th conference. And it's quite important that we understand that it's not a lost cause. A call to continued support will continue, and we want all key players to be part of it. So thank you so much, spokesperson, and thank you to all the representatives that were here.
Thank you very much to our Deputy Minister Mapaseka Steve Letsike. And thank you very much to each and every one of you who took time to be with us this morning as we received the official release of the South African National Prevalence Study on Gender-Based Violence. Thank you very much once again to Prof. Zuma, Dr. Zungu, Prof. Shisana, DG, Me Esther Maluleke, all the colleagues from HSRC who have done amazing work, to the UN Women. I don't want to repeat DM's closing remarks, but please continue, as I said, to have these conversations. The hashtag is hashtag HSRC GBV study. Let's make sure that this study doesn't remain in these four walls, but goes into our communities, on every radio station. If ufikile namhlanje walalela wabezwa ukuthi bathini, khuleka hamba uyoshare nawe lento izwile lana uthi kune study esitheni, and this is the impact that it needs to have on our communities. So with that being said, there are refreshments outside. Siyabonga laba organize lama refreshments, and to any of the media houses that would appreciate time with any of our colleagues here, please do indicate. We will make some time. We were meant to finish at 1 o'clock. We are 10 minutes earlier than 1 o'clock. Thank you very much for your time.